Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk Thatcher and Baron Doctorman, the Weirded Beardos. When last we left the Weirded Beardos, we were in the thick of Kirk Thatcher land.
In the sick of it, yeah. I'm sure they're sick of it, which is why they thought, "Oh, good, a new episode." Nope, sorry, back in the muddy mire of my weird career.
Well, it's
my bearded career or my weirded career.
We're here with Kirk Thatcher. I'm Darren Doctorman, and
he's Darren Doctorman.
We are the Weirded Beardos.
Mostly
on most of these times and channels.
So if we shaved, would we be the
just the weirdos?
No, we'd be the Daved Shaprados. Shapravedos. Anyway, it's a thinker.
Not really.
Shaved, depraved. So I was doing.
Oh,
yeah, I guess we should keep the beards.
Yeah.
So we were talking right before we started, and I just wanted, this is a deep cut.
Yeah.
On Jedi. So the song that Cy Snoodles and Droopy were playing,
right,
singing to, when we recorded it and we rehearsed to Rick James, Super Freak.
Right.
And I don't know. So what happened was John Williams' son wrote
John Williams wrote the music.
Okay, and his son wrote the lyrics.
And his son wrote the lyrics. The English lyrics.
The English, it's got translated. So it's called "A Fancy Man Is Coming."
Yeah.
Which was, it was
but it's now cut out of the movie.
Yeah. Well, in the reissue. Yeah. But if you get the original DVD or something, right, you still have. They cut it out entirely?
You can't get the original version anyway.
Oh, in English, yes.
Yeah.
But the gibberish version or the alien whatever the language is, that's in the movie. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But then they redid it entirely for the
reissue. Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, right. But I mean, if you have the original DVD, you would hear I don't know what language.
The Huttese version. Yeah.
Is it Huttese? The Huttese version of Fancy Man is Coming.
I was just hearing Ben Burt talking about this the other day on a podcast, that the lyrics for the Huttese isn't actually Huttese. It's made up by the girl who recorded the song.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because it's not Huttese. I mean, I'm not a nerd, but I know.
I mean,
I know Klingon and Huttese when I hear it.
I know Huttese, and that's not. They do that too well. Well, now you're doing stuff from the special edition, which is not good.
Although Bantha Poodoo wasn't the original. The Bantha Poodoo. Oh, George. Anyway.
I can't call the guy, thank God.
Well, let's just do Star Wars voices for the Anyway, that was a deep cut. So the John Williams wrote the song "Fancy Man Is Coming." That
Darren, Joseph Williams, his son, wrote.
I couldn't remember his Joe. I think they called him, but I never met the man. But we started with Rick James. I think on set they rehearsed and shot to "A Fancy Man Is Coming," and then it got turned into
My whole frame is thumping. Just a fancy man is coming, so I'm shaping up and working out.
There you go. That's right. Yeah, you remember that. I only heard it when we rehearsed 42 years ago.
Because it's on those documentaries. They have it on those Creatures documentary.
Oh, that's right. I didn't know if you could hear the whole song, though.
You don't hear the whole song. You just hear the good parts.
So this is part 2, but I changed my hat, so this is the second half.
Yes.
Of me blathering
when last we left Kirk, he was on Treasure Island.
And I am now again. Yeah. So Treasure Island was great, and I think I was saying what was wonderful about it was the writers. Well, here's the nightmare that happened. We went over there and we were writing kind of production drafts because either this set piece couldn't be built or we've added this and whatever. We're kind of making it work and adding gags. And Jerry and I, was literally like the week before they were supposed to start shooting, and it was a Friday, and we were doing all the polishes. We had production notes. We'd had 2 or 3 meetings with Brian and the art department. Whatever the things we could do, things we couldn't do. And just tightening up. We'd had some read-throughs, so we literally went through and we hit save. We said, okay, we're just going to go through it one more time. And we started, and on page 7, suddenly, and this was final draft version 2. So this is 1995.
5? That late? Wow.
maybe 94. Well, I think it was shot in 95, came out in 96. Isn't that right?
Okay. I
Anyway, mid
I don't
90s.
remember.
So it was way early version of Final Draft. Infernal Draft, we started calling it, because what happened was we were February just going through making typos, essentially, just a house cleaning pass. And suddenly, and I don't know, it doesn't do this anymore, thank God. Some of the dialogue started turning into gibberish, like hex text code, like not English, not even, just literally gibberish, like symbols, and we're like, whoa, what happened? That wasn't there. Hold on, hit save, and then you hit save, and it would spread. And the more we scrolled through the script,
Oh
the
my
more it spread. I'm
God.
like, oh, okay, stop, just stop. Okay, what do we do? So we're in England, so we call Final Draft because they're, this is like 5, 6 in the afternoon. It's early. So we called Final Draft, and back in those days, the guys who wrote it would answer the phone.
Right.
I said, okay, and they love the fact the Muppets were using it. We're like, we are working on the script, and it started doing this. We don't know what to do. We've saved it. And they said, well, can you send us the file? And we're like, yeah, but back then it was all like,
Yeah.
so we can send you the file. It might take a couple hours. So we sent them the file. They said, we're going to work on it today and send it back to you so you have it
Oh my God.
overnight. So we got it back Saturday, and they had stopped whatever had happened, but about 20% of the script had been gibberished. So Jerry and I went, all right, and we just slogged through with our memory and rewrote everything we remembered. And so that was like, oh my God, computer giveth, computer taketh away. So we got the draft done, and then I stayed on for about 2 or 3 weeks just to kind of be there to help with, they wanted me to stay for the whole thing. I'm like, I don't need to sit there and watch a movie being made.
Aw.
I don't need to see you ruining my jokes. But it was really fun. And the biggest highlight for me was Cabin Fever, which I think we talked about in the middle of a movie when I was a kid, and it was all plot and, character development. I was like, oh, kill me now. So I said, let's put a thing, because in the book, there was a moment where they're cast in irons, they call it, where the wind just dies.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, they start going crazy, because in the book they do handle like, people start getting antsy. And I said, let's do a Cabin Fever thing. So we worked with Barry and Cynthia, who wrote the amazing score, the amazing songs. I'll hold those up against any musical. I think they're wonderful. And so we gave them a list of gags and things, and so they incorporated into them. And then I got to kind of storyboard and write out the visual gags. I didn't really storyboard because we didn't have time. I just wrote out and then it died. I said someone pops off in a coffin, and and so then the puppet shop had to scramble, and props had to make a coffin, and because we didn't really know the song until we were there, and they were it wasn't like it was written a year before.
Right.
So that was great, and it was nice to be respected as a writer, which it's more in movies you're less respected as a writer. I said I did it all wrong. I wrote for movies and directed television. Both jobs were less respected than the converse. If you're a writer in television, you get then you're the big cheese, and if you're a director in a movie, you're the big cheese. But
Right.
TV movies not so much. Anyway, so I did Muppet Treasure Island, became very dear friends with Jerry Jewell. Came back to Los Angeles and started directing little moments for the Muppets. I did one of the things, speaking of Star Wars a little bit earlier, we did a bunch of the Muppets auditioning for characters in Jedi,
Oh, that's funny.
or auditioning for Yoda, I think. And I think Lucasfilm put it as an Easter egg in one of their movies, the Muppets auditioning for Star Wars characters. I think it was mainly for the trilogy, original trilogy.
Right.
But we had Fozzie doing Yoda, so it's Frank doing Fozzie trying to do a bad Yoda.
Hilarious.
Yeah. And again, they showed it at ILM, and then I heard it's in one of the Blu-rays, or one of the it's an Easter egg in one of them.
Wow. I don't think I've ever seen it, but that sounds great.
I'm sure it might just be on YouTube now. But so Henson had joined forces with a company called Hallmark, which is not the card company, it was Hallmark Channel. So it was Henson Hallmark. And I started doing writing and directing these little skits as interstitials for that with Jim Lewis. Jim and I would write them, and I'd direct them. And I started directing and worked with Frank, and Steve Whitmire was doing Kermit. And it was a lot of fun, and kind of getting my Muppet directing chops in. And so this was between 96, end of 95, 96, into about 97. And then the Muppets sold, the company sold Muppets Tonight, which was basically a redo of the Muppet Show, but now it was a TV station.
Right.
We thought we'll update a little bit. It'll be a TV station instead of a vaudeville theater or a music hall theater. and so started working on that, both designing, writing, and was I forgot, a supervising producer on it. And we worked on that for about a year. About a year. We did 2 seasons. ABC put it on the air, and after the first 12 or 13, Dick Basucci, who was the showrunner, who had come from SCTV, who had great stories about those
Right.
guys. Um, he and I went to meet with Jamie Tarsis, who had just taken over ABC as the head of the network head.
Yeah.
And she really only had one question. It was like, how are you going to get males 18 to 35? And we're like, well, we've had test screenings, and that is the group that is the least, they want cars and boobs and beer. And she goes, I know. So how are you going to get them? I said, well, we've had Michelle Pfeiffer. We've had Heather Locklear. I mean, we've had Sandra Bullock, who was amazing. I could do a whole episode about how great she was. And and she's like, okay. I said, so, we're trying. I mean, it's not a kiddie show. We had Pierce Brosnan. We killed our guest stars. We were doing everything. And I remember at one point we showed, two guys who'd become friends were guys who were running Seinfeld with Larry David, or for Larry David, Max and Tom, Pross and Gamble. And we knew them because Max Pross's wife was Jim Henson's assistant and a development exec back in the early 80s or mid 80s when I met him. Mira Velimirovich. It's a hell of a name. And she was a sweetheart. So we'd become friends with them. We said, hey, do you want to read our scripts to see like what you think? Like, is there something we're missing? And they read a couple and they got back to us and it's hilarious. Like it's the Muppets. Like you're doing what we would expect from the Muppets. We don't have any notes. So at least from people we respected comedically, they were like, this is great. But ABC, I think, moved our time slot like 3 or 4 times. One of the biggest issues we heard from fans was Kermit wasn't used as much. And that's because Steve had just started doing Kermit like full time as opposed to in a movie once in a while. And there was a concern that the difference would be more noticeable. Not that Steve's one of the most amazing puppeteers technically, but he's not a mimic, and that's not really the way the Henson Company works. It's like you take on the character, like you said earlier, you become the character,
make it your own, and
make it your own. And he didn't try and change the voice. He just, as someone once said, it sounds like Kermit doing a Steve Whitmire impression, which is fair. I mean, everyone, their brother does a Kermit the Frog.
Sure, but
so we relied more on Clifford, which is a character I designed for the Jim Henson Hour.
Right.
And it was Kevin Clash, who's an amazing performer. But the personality of Clifford was like, we said, okay, when I started the Jim, I said, why don't we have non-white but ethnic Muppets? Because Stout and Waldorf are white, J.P. Gross is white. There were definitely Caucasian Muppets. I said, why don't we do Muppets who are of other ethnic diversity? And Jim was down with that. He loved that idea. I designed an Asian guy, and I designed Clifford, who was African American or African, stylized, of course. Yeah. And the thing was, we would Kevin would perform him, so they couldn't take pot shots at us and say we're doing black sock.
Yeah, right.
It's a blackface. So Kevin, who's an amazing puppeteer, came up with like, yeah, man, hey, Kerm, he's just kind of a cool dude. And I think the problem was why he wasn't a bigger character certainly wasn't the design. Because he kind of looked like
energy.
Well, because everyone wanted to be safe. Like he couldn't get into any kind of stereotype. So he was just a cool man, like, hey, Kerm, be cool. And like he was basically like another Kermit. Like Kermit was like, all right, everybody, but Kermit would go, ah, and the idea was Clifford was unflappable. It's like, all right, well, I've seen worse. It's a fun idea. It didn't. I still love the character, but it didn't gel so much with the audience. Now, the character that did come out of Muppets Tonight that I loved, and I loved writing for it, I still do, is Pepe, which was Bill Beretta.
Yep.
Basically taking an impression of his aunt, who was Spanish, and turning into this amazing character. And I think I'd said earlier on one of our podcasts about we needed our Daffy Duck. We needed a guy who was a complete unrepentant a-hole.
Right.
Because you drive stories besides me, who represented my point of view. Well, because they had gotten to the point when I started, like everyone was sweet and loved each other, and we're all just a bunch of friends who get along and live in the same house, which is fine. But it was becoming Full House, except without Bob Saget, everyone was Uncle Sweetie Pie. So I was like, all right, let's. And then Brian, so it was Seymour and Pepe, and Brian was this big dumb elephant, and Pepe was the little jerk, and Brian just never got the character. He liked it. He's just like, okay. I mean, Pepe kind of drove it, and Seymour was the straight man essentially, and Brian just didn't have the. And that's the thing with the Muppets. You can write a great character. We had a character who has become what Matt Vogel is doing with Deadly. He was named Alligator, and he was a reptile who studied Shakespeare, and he talked like this. And Matt sort of has taken Deadly and turned him into that guy. He was very, very, flamboyant and queenie and snarky.
Oh, Jonathan Harris.
Exactly. I mean, it literally is based on Jonathan Harris.
Yeah.
Oh
dear.
Oh dear. But the idea was he's an alligator, so he never got, he got like a third role in Jurassic Park, and he wanted to play, the romantic leads. And so some of that personality has gone into Uncle Deadly, which made me very happy because that's one of my other favorite characters. So I wrote him Muppets Tonight for 2 seasons, and then ABC pulled us after the first season, which was sad. But we'd already shot, I guess, the second season. They put it up on the Disney Channel, so nobody got any money, no residuals, all that stuff you do with TV.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, funny. Ha ha. But also, so let's see. Hadn't directed then. I was writing and supervising producer, which was great. I got to work with Garth Brooks. It's Prince. I was supervising producer on set for Prince, Garth Brooks, Sandra Bullock. Who else? Cindy Crawford, which was its own story. So had a great time, and we won an Emmy like 2 years later.
Yeah.
And it won for Best Children's Program, which is funny because Muppets Mayhem just won for Best Children's Program. So even when you try, I mean, there were drug references and stuff, or at least getting stoned references and that, and they're like, oh, it's a kid's show. Like, all right.
Yeah. Don't you know puppets are for kids?
Puppets are for kids. I know, which is why, well, jumping ahead, Christine McConnell, I said, don't call them puppets, call them creatures. Because Gremlins isn't a kid's movie. I mean, kids love it, but it's not a kid's movie.
Yeah.
If they looked like Uncle Deadly, it would have been a kid's movie. So, so learning that, I started directing. Well, I'd been directing shorts. I did not direct on the show. And what happened was I had written a script. So I'd written 3 Muppet movies at that point, aside from Treasure Island, with Jim Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
One was a haunted man, or a Halloween special that ultimately they took the story and turned it into Muppet Monster Madness or Muppet Monster Mayhem or something. It became a video game. But the idea was the Muppets go to Transylvania and get changed into classic monsters. And then, so that didn't get made. And then it turned into another special, or a movie idea, which was basically a Muppets kind of Ghostbusters, except the core team get turned into ghosts and have to go to ghost haunting school and learn how to be ghosts, and then try and they got unalived, I think was what the term we used, because they're like, well, you can't kill them. I'm like, well, they're unalived through magic. So they were under a bookcase that had crushed them, so their bodies weren't like rotting away. Well, like they were just unalived by a vengeful ghost who was trying to marry Miss Piggy, and if she married him and stayed married for 24 hours, he would get his human form back and be alive. And anyway, it was very silly and fun, and that didn't get made. And so I had gone off and written on my own Muppets in Space.
Right.
And it was essentially like, I mean, this is way before Family Guy had done the Star Wars parodies. It was around the same time, actually, I had written it just before Galaxy Quest came out.
Right.
So we had a lot of the same ideas, except it wasn't, there was a TV show and Kermit was mistaken. It was like, it was 200 years in the future, and the Muppet Core gang had gone through military space, like basically Federation training.
Right.
And they were so bad they got put on the janitorial crew on the Impressive, the USS Impressive. Piggy, though, had shown real strength, and so she had gone into commanding school, and graduated as an admiral because she was ruthless and knew how to yell.
Like Denise Richards.
Yes. I've never met the woman. But she was tough, and so she got, she matriculated into I don't know what you call it, like West Point, and they got janitorial class. So, anyways, a long story short, Kermit's mistaken for an alien leader, and in another side of the galaxy. It was really funny, and Disney wanted to make it. At the same time, Jerry Jewell had written a script he called Star Gonzos, which was about Gonzo. It was very small. It was really about Gonzo going through a midlife crisis of like, who am I? What am
Yeah.
I? I don't know what I am. Everyone else knows. You're a pig. You're a frog. You're two old white guys. I'm a whatever. So he'd written this very sweet small movie, and it was essentially about Gonzo being uh, discovered by a group of UFO nuts. I remember when we were doing Treasure Island, Jerry had all these UFO books. I'm like, oh, I love UFO stuff. He goes, I think they're crazy, but I love that world, so I'm doing a story about it. So this was what the story was, is that Gonzo had become beloved by this group of like a cult,
Right.
and had kind of become their leader, and was sort of enjoying the fact that he was regarded. I mean, not that the Muppets hated him, but it was sort of like, oh, these people like me more, and the Muppets think I'm a weirdo.
Right.
And so we both had these two scripts, and Jerry was very sweet. He sent me a copy of his. I sent him a copy of mine. He wrote me back. He said, "Look, this is hilarious. Don't forget the core, the heart of the characters and how they care and take care of each other. Even though it's 200 years in the future, they're still the Muppets." And I'm like, "Thank you, yeah." And very sweet notes. And I didn't give him notes. I didn't feel it was my place to give him notes on his script. So during that time, the Disney deal ended, and I don't know
Right.
why. And Sony picked up distribution. Now, Sony was run by Amy Pascal at that point, and they read the two scripts and they said, well, we want to do Star Gonzos because it's sweeter and smaller and it costs a lot less money.
Right.
Because mine had spaceships and planets and aliens. So they started developing it with obviously the Henson development, the development team. And it went through, long story short, it went through 17 different writers. There at the end of the movie, because I wrote on it for a couple of weeks and then did punch up, they sent out, the Writers Guild sends out a thing going, okay, do you want your name on this? And if you do, you have to show what you contributed.
Right.
And so I didn't want my name on it because I was one of the last, like probably 13th or maybe 15th or 16th writer. I was writing jokes while I was shooting second unit in Wilmington. We shot in Wilmington back where we'd shot Cat's Eye 20 years earlier. So, or whatever it was. And don't do the math on that. This was 99.
Yeah.
So it had been not 20 years. It had been probably 15 years earlier. So Jerry kind of left. He just left he just gave up.
Yeah.
And I think he didn't even want his name. I think he got Story by, but it had just gotten blown out. And the whole thing of his was you didn't know at the end that Gonzo was an alien or not. You just knew that he didn't need that kind of ego stroking to feel loved. And the Muppets really loved him for who he was, not for who they wanted him to be.
Right.
And there was this very sweet, very small story. And I remember we had the read through after like this. So they'd hired a couple people at this point to do a few new drafts. And they had a read through, and it was fine. It was a smile. It wasn't a big laugh fest. And I remember the execs brought me into a room afterwards. Like, oh, we need to talk to you. I'm like, okay, well, what is it? And they go, well, it's not funny. I'm like, it's not a big comedy script. It's a small, warm, fuzzy, sweet script. Well, what do we do? I said, well, you usually rewrite it and bring Jerry in, and see. He was like, okay, because there wasn't like we didn't laugh at all. I'm like, well, first of all, the Muppet guys don't reread it to like do a great performance in the read through. They just do it kind of pro forma, and they know their characters, so it's not like let me explore. It's like I do my characters, but
Nobody's this ain't
like
the movie. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, they save it for
they save it
but
for
they
the
read
movie.
it, like again, they'll read it and then maybe not realize, oh, I'm supposed to play this like straight and I did it funny or vice versa. Right. And I'm not throwing shade. I'm just saying, yeah, they don't bring it to the first read through.
Yeah.
And the other thing was it was more of a Hallmark movie than the kind of thing I was doing, which was big, broad, goofy jokes. So they panicked and brought ultimately 17 writers on it. And I still think it's probably the worst one in terms of production. It was just a mess. The director gave up knowing what to shoot and just said, he went to the AD, what are we shooting today? And it wasn't his fault. It was just they kept rewriting pages. The producers were writing pages. I was writing pages. I was writing gags. So he was just like, all right, just tell me what we're shooting and I'll shoot it. So it was a frustrating shoot. I, on the other hand, got my director's, the DGA card. I got my director's guild because I was doing second unit. I was there writing. They go, hey, do you want to direct? Because I'd already directed a bunch of stuff. So I did some insert shots and a couple little scenes. And so that's how I got my director's card. And then that came out, I guess, in 2000. And so at this point, I'd had an overall deal with the Henson Company for about 6 years. and it ended in 2000 because their deal with Disney had ended and ABC, and then their deal with Sony was just for pictures.
Right.
So I did some rewriting and I did some voice work on uh, the Sesame Street movie, Elmo, whatever
In
that was.
Grouchland.
Grouchland, yeah, I did some Grouch voices in that, so I started doing voiceover stuff. Um, and then I was developing shows. One show I worked on as just a character designer in this window of time was called Aliens in the Family, and it was written by Andy Borowitz, who I really respected as a writer. He's a lovely
Mm-hmm.
guy, but he'd written a show. I designed the aliens, and I don't know. It kind of seemed like it was written campy. It was too much winking to the audience, so you kind of went like dinosaurs was the whole world, so you kind of went, all right, this is a whole universe. It has its own tone. This
Yeah.
was humans interacting with aliens. It was a guy had married an alien wife. She had probed him and she liked him, so she ended up marrying him. But their kids were complete alien weirdos. And I think the dad had one kid from a previous marriage. So it was a Brady Bunch, but with aliens. And the aliens were very bizarre and fun to design. But the show never found its kind of footing. I think Andy sold it, and then it seemed to me like he wasn't and again, I'm not throwing shade. I didn't really work on it past the design stage.
Yeah.
I just know it didn't. I think they made episodes, aired 3 and killed it. So I worked on that. And then they came to me and they said, we're going to do a TV movie. NBC really loves the Muppets. They wanted a new Muppet show, but they felt like they weren't ready for that. And so, long story short, Jim Lewis had written a Muppet version of It's a Wonderful Life.
Hmm.
And so they brought in another writer, Tom, I'll remember his last name in a second. And he rewrote it, working off Jim's outline, I guess. And that's how Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie came about.
Hmm.
And that was my first directing gig. We shot up in Canada. I think 4 of my 5 pictures have been shot. My pictures have been shot up in Vancouver. It was amazing. We built the entire Muppet Theater. Like, you could walk from the doors that led into the audience section of the raked stage, and it was like a 350 seat theater. We got
Hmm.
real theater seats, and you could walk up on the stage and go backstage in one continuous it was like Steadicam shot, and it was all
Yeah.
real. I mean,
Oh,
except for
that's
the
cool.
ceiling and the floor. The problem was the Muppets you can't do
Yeah.
that with the puppets. Yeah. But we had Joan Cusack, David Arquette. It was a great cast, a bunch of cameos that NBC wanted, and it was a really fun experience. I remember Dave Goles, who's always been my biggest supporter as a director. I remember after the first or second week, he came up to me and goes, "This is what you should be doing. You're great at this. You know what you want. You're really fast. You tell us, you kind of got it blocked out." I'm like, "Isn't that the job?" He goes, "You'd be surprised."
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that started my career. What was funny was now I wasn't a writer anymore. Now I was a director.
Right.
So I did that. I worked on, so I was developing my own stuff because I wasn't in-house anymore. I was out-house. I was a freelancer. So
Yeah.
when I wasn't, directing or getting set up to direct a Muppet thing. So we did that. And 2 years later, we did Muppets Wizard of Oz. But in
Right.
the middle, I'd gotten a call about the show called Lazy Town being shot in Iceland. And yeah, it was crazy. So I get a
Yeah.
call from a woman who's like, I'm a producer in New York, and I've been contacted by the show in Iceland. They're looking for directors who've got special effects and Muppet experience. And your name came up with some of the New York puppet people who are going to work on it. And so, are you interested? I'm like, well, okay, what is it? Well, it's a show. I can send you like a demo. So she did, and so I was courting a new agency, or they'd signed me, and they were useless. I won't name names, but I called the guy who was supposed to be my agent. I said, "Hey, I was contacted about the show in Iceland. It's Puppets and Things. I'm looking for a director, kind of showrunner, not as a head writer, but someone to make it work because it was computer graphics, high def, and puppets and people all working together."
Right.
And they said, oh, "Okay, great, great." And then like 2 weeks later, the woman in New York contacted me again, and said, "Are you interested? Because they're waiting and they need somebody." I'm like, "Didn't my agent call you?" She's like, "No, nope, haven't heard from anybody."
Oh my
So I called
goodness.
my lawyer, said, "Hey, here's this deal." So in 2 days, we had a deal. I was
Yeah.
going to fly out to Iceland. They were going to put me up in Reykjavik. It was open ended, see how it went. But I was definitely going to do 2 episodes, which would take about 2.5 months, and see how it goes. But open ended to maybe do this first season at least. So I pack up, and this is right before Muppets. So it was 2004. So I'd done Very Merry, had a year where I was developing and stuff, but nothing was getting made. So 2004, I got this call about Lazy Town. So I go to Iceland and I meet this guy who created it, who was, I mean, the definition of a narcissist. An amazing guy. I mean, considering what he did in Iceland, it's like sometimes the people who get a lot of shit done are narcissists because they just have this,
Yeah.
maniacal or monomaniacal vision, and they're just like, I will dance and cheat and steal and sell and flatter anyone to help get this made. So he sold the U.S. rights to Nickelodeon,
Hmm.
and he'd done this pilot, and he'd been told by another producer that he could shoot the show in like 2 days, like every episode. And I went out there, and they were shooting in. It was the first high def. There were 6 Sony high def cameras at the time.
Uh-huh.
Or red cameras. Sorry, red cameras. We'd shot the Muppet stuff in the '90s. Sorry, in the early 2000s on the Sonys. So they had 2 of the 6 red cameras in existence. They were going to do live blue screen. They had the guys from Ultimat there. He
Right.
was like a Polish inventor, and he had done a high def version that he jury rigged and made specific, not jury rigged, made specifically for the show. They had these huge foam latex puppets that were the size of parade floats, um, to to be in the show along with this little girl. It was a great little dancer and gymnast, and it was insane. The best thing to come out of it was an actor named Stefan Karl, who played Robbie Rotten. If anyone's seen the show, he's the highlight of the show. He plays this bad guy. He's like talks like a Russian version of the Grinch, and his name was Robbie Rotten. They gave him this big prosthetic chin, and like rubber hair, black rubber hair. He always was like talking like this. I know how to beat Sporticus. So the hero was Sporticus. It was basically a show about teaching kids how to eat healthy and be healthy and have a healthy lifestyle. So that's why it's called Lazy Town, because all the people
I
there
see.
ate
They're
sugar.
lazy.
Yeah. So like the episodes were like, you need to eat sports candy. Oh, what's sports candy? It's an apple. And then Robbie Rotten, who for some reason wanted nobody to be healthy, was like, no, you want real candy. So it was a very goofy show. And I could go into a whole episode about what a nightmare it was to shoot, because a couple quick things. Because of the high bandwidth of these red cameras, they didn't have enough storage space. It
Right.
was
You were
terabytes,
constantly
right?
changing the mags or whatever they
Well,
are.
they couldn't, because they only had like, let's say 6 terabytes, and you shot for 20 minutes, and that was 4 terabytes, right?
Yeah.
So the showrunner, this narcissist, came to me and he goes, "Okay, you can only save the takes you're going to use." I'm like,
Oh
"Well,
my God.
I don't know how to. I can't delete them until I know which was the best take." So he goes, "No, we don't. You couldn't do like 4 takes if they were more than like 45 seconds."
Oh my God.
And the other thing was we only had one camera. And so it's like you couldn't shoot 2 cameras to get 2 angles. So it was just an entire cluster foo. And but one, anyway, uh the other thing was this guy didn't know how to shoot puppets. So I got sick. I got really sick for a couple days, and the narcissist who was like, "I can do your job better than anybody."
Uh-huh.
He could do everybody's job better than
Of
everybody.
course.
Because I was sick, he went and shot one day, and everyone's, if you don't know how to shoot puppets, and the actors are usually on a 38 to 40 inch like standing thing, so they can be eye to eye with the puppets. He had the actress on that, but the puppets all looked like they were standing in a hole. They were all like talking to her crotch, and he didn't. For some reason, like you look at it on lens, you're like, why? So he was very upset that the stuff he shot wasn't usable. And I came back, and at this point, he was like, "You're taking too long. You are only getting like 3 minutes a day." I'm like, "Well, I can't move the camera." This is the other thing, because the Ultimat system wasn't ready yet. I couldn't move the camera.
Right.
I couldn't even dolly. I couldn't pan, tilt, anything. Locked off shots. I could only do these short takes. Had to then pick the take. So it was almost like a test of like the fact that I shot 2 episodes. So he kept saying, "Well, you need to do a storyboard so you know exactly what to shoot." His idea was, if you and I were talking, I would just shoot your line and then turn around and shoot my line, and then shoot your line and then shoot my line. I said, "But that's crazy. I would just shoot all the angles." He goes, "Yes, but then you're wasting all this time where he's not saying a line." I'm like, "But he's listening. You need listening." No, this is what I mean. He was a narcissist who didn't. what was funny was he knew good filmmaking. Like he'd made a test where he knew angles and stuff, but he literally shot it that way. Okay, I'm going to say this, and then he shot that, and he didn't know coverage. He hadn't done TV, he had
Wow.
done movies,
Yeah.
like short films. So I was saying, well, that's kind of insanity. And so again, after 2 episodes, he's like, well, I remember we had a meeting with the producers who were these lovely guys who were Icelandic, mainly film producers. They'd done, when James Bond goes to shoot there, they're the guys you call for
Right.
their production company. And so we have this meeting after the first episode. He goes, that's very good. You need to go faster and know exactly what you're going to shoot. I said, you need a storyboard. I said, well, storyboards really don't help. I can't move the camera. I mean, it's either 2 people talking, 3 people talking. I mean, I don't need to storyboard it. Well, and how are you going to make it faster? I said, well, it's really not me that's the problem. Your setup, the way you shoot faster is you cover one shot for the reactions and the
Yeah.
dialogue, and then no, you can't do that. And I said, okay, well, if you're good, and I remember this was the quote: "If you're a good enough director, you can do it." I said, "Nah, I'm not that good." And so then he goes, "Well, then I said, "I'm not that good. You should do it." He goes, "I will do it." Literally the AD, who was a lovely guy, Richie, he'd been Woody Allen's AD on like 8 films, almost leapt across the table and went, no, you can't, because the guy starred in it. He was the star.
Yeah.
He said, no, you can't direct and star in it. It's already hard enough. And so I did one more episode, and we sped up a little. I think at the end of the second episode, I could dolly left or right. I couldn't go
Right.
in or out, but I could move left or right. Couldn't pan, or I could only pan on the nodal point. It was
Right.
Yeah, it was crazy because every there was a set and then a blue screen background, and they didn't do tracking markers at that point. So after 2 months of that, I said, "You guys are great." Stefan and his wife became dear friends. A couple other people were good friends.
This has been great, guys. Thanks. I gotta go.
Well, I got a call about doing another Muppet movie, which
Right.
was
Wizard
became
of Oz.
Wizard of Oz. So I went back and, long story short, did that. The biggest frustration with that, I love the idea. I thought that we just were kind of hampered by having Ashanti, who was a lovely singer, great
Yeah.
person, could not carry a movie at that point in her career. Um, so, and again, I've talked about that on Muppet Podcast. So after that, there was kind of a dry spell where I was doing other things. I wrote episodes of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, which was a great show. They
Right.
brought me on because I'd written for the Muppets, and that show was like 5 main imaginary friend characters who were very Muppet-like in their personalities, like extreme weirdos.
Sure.
And so I wrote some of those. I did this crazy, like all the things that I did that didn't really go anywhere. It was called Baby Einstein. And this producer from South Africa had decided that what kids shows really needed, little kid shows like Sesame Street level, like 2 to 6, was real little kids in it. That mindset. And so I went to the first meeting, and there were it was puppets and kids. And he said, "But we got to use real 4-year-olds." I said, "That's a terrible idea. Real 4-year-olds can act." He goes, "I know. It's very pure and innocent. It'll be real." I'm like, "But they can't act. They can't take direction." He goes, "No, it's they don't have to do much." So, compressing the story, we had the great puppets and a great a guy, Dan, who had worked with the Muppets, and he's a very creative guy, and he kind of sold this idea. But this guy had come in and said, "No, we're going to use real 4-year-olds." So we shot. Here's the thing. So a puppet is a very enigmatic, fun thing to look at, especially when it's talking. Now, when you're 4, you don't look at the puppet. You might look at the puppet, and then you look down at the band,
Yeah.
the big hairy guy who's standing out there going, "Hey, Skippy, you want to go?" They could not look at the puppets for more
Yeah.
than a second or two. So we kind of muddled through this thing, and one of the puppeteers, Victor Yera, does a great impression of me trying to direct a 4-year-old. No. Okay, just see Skippy, the squirrel? Just look at his eyes. Like, when he's talking, look at him. Okay. And then they start talking, and they go, I mean, you can't be mad at them. They're 4.
Yeah.
So that was a thing that shows up on my IMDb. It is never released. Einstein Pals.
That's what it is. Einstein Pals.
Einstein
You said
Pals.
Baby Einstein, which was a different project.
No, Baby Einstein was the brand, and this was
Oh, this was an
subset of-
offshoot of that.
Disney bought or was producing Baby Einstein. This was
Right.
an offshoot of it, yeah.
Okay.
And it was puppets and kids, and the puppets were great. And Dan and his team had done a great job with them. But this crazy producer had sold everyone that we're going to get 4 to 5-year-olds to
Yeah.
act. Or So that
You need to
was,
get them to come in and direct too.
yeah, yeah. Um, so then, I mean, I guess the next big thing was wrote from animation. I'd written a couple movies for the Henson Company that did not get made. One was based on a script that a guy out of England had written called Water Warriors, and the cute idea was that aliens had come to Earth, but they were the size of grasshoppers, and their ship crashed in a pond in
And
English
no one
countryside.
noticed.
Yeah, but they had this device that was going to take all the water from Earth and bring
Oh,
it and send it up to their planet or send it up to giant ships, whatever. They were going to steal all the water, and so this group of pond animals, like a turtle, a frog, a snake, maybe a fish or two, had mainly the frogs were kind of the heroes, had discovered this and were trying to fight these aliens. And so he'd had a very sweet script, so I turned around trying to make it funny and more action adventure and that never got made. I mean, I have a long list of scripts I've written that I got paid for and never got made. There's an episode. But the fun thing that came out about this time was Curious Creations of Christine McConnell,
right.
which was Christine has this amazing Instagram channel. And what time is it? We're good? Yeah.
Yeah, we got about
Um,
20 minutes.
okay. This Instagram channel, and she's an amazing creator, a maker. Like mainly it started was baking things like cakes and desserts,
Right,
but either very creaturey related. Like, I
right.
mean, she would do an alien cake that looked just like the alien queen, or do a Beetlejuice thing, and she had all these amazing pastries and decorative items that she'd done, and just an amazing craftsperson.
Yeah.
So she had a good following on Instagram. I mean, hundreds of thousands of followers. And so she had, with her management, the people that had produced her book had come to, I guess, I forgot if they'd gone to, I think it was CBS or Universal, CBS Viacom, yeah, and said, hey, we want to do a show. So they said, well, who would you want to do it with? She said, I want to do it with the Henson Company because they know how to do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the Henson Company done a test with a couple creatures that I forgot about Turkey Hollow. Turkey Hollow was a thing I did based on a Jim Henson story that Ian Jerry had written in the 60s, and we turned it into a TV movie, and we designed these creatures. We're working with Pete Brook at the Creature Shop. Kind of designed these furry, goofy looking, but not Muppety looking, real hair and
Yeah.
glass eyes.
Creaturey.
So yes, creatures. They used one in the test just to see how it was literally shot in Christine's kitchen in her house. And she showed me that, and I said, this is fun. I met with Christine, and she had these ideas for these characters in the show. So I turned her ideas into a show.
Right.
So I was the showrunner. I wrote 4 of the 6 scripts, and I directed all of them. And because it was a reality show, I get no credit except as executive producer with like 5 other people.
Awesome.
Yeah, good times.
Lovely story.
But it was really fun. I got to create one of the personalities. Essentially, the alligator character became this cat, a mummified cat. She had wanted 2 raccoons. I said, I mean, if we only have 3 characters we can afford, let's not do doubles.
Right.
So Rose was one of the raccoons. She had the name. She wanted Rose and Rankle. I said, okay. Rose was this Frankenstein, basically a roadkill raccoon that her character had reanimated, but used parts of a dog and a squirrel. And one of her, I pulled one of my favorite gags from all the way back from Dinosaurs. Rose's right hand was a fork.
Right.
It had been, the idea was she was pawing, trying to get garbage out of the garbage disposal, hit the button with her foot, tore off her hand, so she'd replaced it with a fork. So I designed this kind of, mangy looking raccoon, put a little pink bow in her hair to kind of go, oh, she's,
It's cute.
that was that. Yeah, she's cute. And she was. We got an amazing performer. She did such a great job of taking the script and then just making her live Colleen Smith. Just well, the good thing about this was I got to help cast. I mean, as essentially the showrunner, I got to cast it and I worked with people I knew really well.
Right.
Our budget was absurdly small, like ridiculously small. Like we begged and borrowed all the parts. We used mainly parts the Creature Shop already had. That's why Rankle was a cat, because they had done cats and dogs, and they had mechanics and underskulls and everything for a cat. I said, well, let's make it a mummified Egyptian cat, because they were worshipped in Egypt, who was worshipped as a god. So in his mind, he's still a god. And then again, this guy who's a performer, who is an improv guy and worked at the Creature Shop, literally as like a shop tech. A guy named Michael Ostrom performed him, did an amazing job. And then my buddy Drew Massey
Yep.
did Edgar the Werewolf, and then Morgana Ignis, who's a super performer I'd known forever, played the suit, was in the suit of the werewolf. Edgar, no, wait, oh my God, Edgar was. This is like 6 years ago now. Rose, Rankle, Edgar, right? Yeah, because there was a creature in the basement that was just two dark eyes and black fur. Anyway, you can tell I'm tired. Or I'm just old.
Or you're just making this stuff up.
Just make it
Which
up.
could also be.
Anyway, so I got to write. I was originally going to write two, and we had two other writers. One of the writers didn't work out. He didn't really get the vibe of the show. So my friend Jordana Arkin wrote two of the episodes, and I wrote the other four.
Yeah.
But they were really fun. It was edgy. It was more adult. Christine was great at being Christine.
Yeah.
She's not an actress, but she knew how to be herself, and she's got a very calm, kind of quiet, demeanor. And she would talk to camera. And we played the joke that the creatures that she lived with, is in this big Victorian haunted mansion, didn't know that they were in a show. So when she talked to camera, they're like, "Who's she talking to?" It's like, she's crazy. So it was really fun. It's on Netflix. I if anyone's not seen it, at least watch the first two episodes. If you don't like it by that, you're not going to like it. But the other thing was, our budget was so low. How low was it? It was so low that we actually took all entire set except for one wall was free, because it was NBC Universal. Yeah, it was NBC, not CBS. NBC Universal, and they had it back in the days, and this is all gone now. They had a scene dock where they just would store sets from shows and movies and furniture. So we begged, borrowed, and my production designer, Darcy Prevost, who ended up being my production designer on Muppets Haunted Mansion. This is where we became friends. She had been the art director on the Jim Henson, on Jim Henson's Creature Shop Challenge, where I was a judge.
Right.
That was a great job. So we met on that. They said, "What about Darcy for this?" I said, "Sure." I mean, I liked her. And then we got along like a house on fire. So she went and basically picked all the walls and everything, literally the entire set of that house. Every room of that house was something we found or she found, and we repainted it and maybe put up wallpaper. So it was this Frankenstein house, which kind of worked. It was supposed to be weird old Victorian. And we shot that show in, I think, 18 days. It was literally like just over 3 weeks, or it was 15 days, which is how long it took to shoot Muppet Haunted Mansion. So we did 6 episodes. We basically had to do an episode every 2 days.
Right. That's insane.
Yeah, it was 2 cameras. Yeah, it was insane. And of course, they're like, "Why is this taking so long?" I'm like, "Are you?" And it was puppets. We couldn't afford to raise. Remember, there's this big meeting. Can we afford to raise the floor so the puppets can? And we're like, "Well, if we don't, then we get more set, and then we get a budget for more props or something." It was just so insane. So I said, "All right." Edgar walks around on the floor. Christine's going to be walking around the floor. The guest stars are going to be walking around the floor. We'll just have to have the puppets on a classic Muppet bit where they're on a dolly and laying on their back.
Right. And behind something.
And really, it was only for Rose, because Rankle, again, we couldn't afford to build 2, like a walking one. So we just had a sitting one. The idea was he would just appear and just be there sitting and commenting, because he's a mummy. Like, it's not super. So we kind of like, all right, it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Right.
He can't move. He's a mummy. But because of that, I could do a whole lecture about how I think unbounded creativity leads to problems.
Absolutely. You need restrictions to help focus your ideas.
Because then you're just shooting into the ether. I mean, I can name any number of movies where the directors had a hit film where they'd had a tighter budget, and then they got, "Here, you made The Matrix. Yeah. Make whatever you want. You get all the money in the world," and it gets flabby. Yeah. So we were kind of proof that, and I think the show, again, I used to say we need a crawl at the beginning saying this was done for basically a garage sale budget. But I'm proud of it. I think it's funny, and it definitely, considering budget and schedule, we did an amazing job, which nobody knows. They're just like, "Oh, it's fun." And Christine had gone off to have like 1 million followers on Instagram, and she bought an old Victorian house.
She bought an old house that was
like for like $400,000
like that, yeah,
in upstate New York, and basically She lives her show.
Right.
She works on her house and builds her furniture, and her husband films it. He writes the score. She writes the script, stars in it, and does the building. And they're living their dream in their
Yeah.
dream house. It's an amazing. It's a gorgeous house.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, damn. And I was back looking for work. But I mean, she deserves all that success. She's really amazing. Uh, so that happened. That was after Turkey Hollow,
Right.
which again was shot up in Canada, and it was more of a kind of a kid's adventure kind
It
of
was.
thing.
It came on Lifetime.
Yeah, that was a whole story. They were not used to making comedies. They're used to making like, and we all learned a valuable lesson,
Yeah.
and she left her husband who was cheating on her and trying
Right.
to kill her.
Right.
Yeah, so this was weird. I was like, it's a comedy, and they're like, it's too silly. I'm like,
She's
it's
been
like,
in the big city too long, and she has
yeah,
to come home for a
well,
problem, and then she realizes her destiny.
yes. Well, we had Mary Steenburgen, who was great.
Yeah.
And I love talking to her about working with Jack Nicholson on what was it, the Missouri Breaks, or no,
Yeah.
was it Missouri Breaks, or oh, wasn't it that?
I think it was.
It was about the law where a guy's going to be hanged if a single woman wanted to marry him.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it was. Anyway, so it was like Jack Nicholson first resurrected, and she was like 19 or 20.
Yeah.
She had these amazing stories, which are hers to tell, but she was great. She was so sweet when I met with her, and she said she was going to do it. She loved Jim Henson. She loved the idea. And she basically is playing the complete opposite of herself. She's playing this kind of cranky old aunt whose husband was a nut job, who had found these creatures, and she kind of tolerated him. And she was called Aunt Cly. It was based on a story that Jerry Jewell had written with Jim Henson.
So she's playing Ted Danson.
No, not at all.
No,
Sleeping
not at
with Ted
all.
Danson. Playing, I said less, because she was doing a scene and her natural sweetness came out. I said less Mary Steenburgen, more Frances Sternhagen.
Yes.
And she's
Oh
like,
my God, that's funny.
Frances Sternhagen, do I look that old? I'm like, no, I'm talking about
No.
personality. Like, just kind of drier and more, old school Marmy. So we done that, and then Christine McConnell. And then the Muppets changed hands at Disney again. They'd had 5 different management teams since 2004 when
Yeah.
they were bought by Disney, or the Henson family sold them to Disney.
Right.
And we did a bunch of shorts called The Muppets Now. Started as one thing, became another thing. I worked on 2 or 3 of those. My favorite one was Pepe's Game Show, which is, if you've ever seen a Latin American game show, or there's a show out of Mexico called A la Cama, where it's this crazy host and it's all showgirls dancing, and
Yeah.
it just seems completely freewheeling and weird. I said, well, that seems like the show that Pepe would want.
Probably.
So we kind of wrote a script, and then Bill would just improv off of it, and we hired as the guests, the contestants were improv actors, and so it was completely unhinged, and that was fun to do. And that's where Joe the Legal Weasel came about, which was a new Muppet character that Peter Linz did. And so that pretty much brings us right up to Muppet Haunted Mansion. So the end it was Muppet Haunted Mansion. Wrote the story, and then co-wrote it with Jim Lewis and I, and Kelly Younger broke the story, and then Jim didn't want to. He had a lot of stuff going on in his personal life, so he just would kind of do notes. So then Kelly Younger, Bill Barrett, and I wrote it, and it starred Pepe. And I'd been trying to do a Muppet Halloween movie for ages, so Disney owned the Haunted Mansion, so that was great. The production was fraught with problems, but again, the Muppets. So, and then a year after that, I got my cameo in Werewolf by Night. Now, that's another story. I've told that a few times, but what was interesting to me was our budget was $7.5 million to do all singing, dancing Muppets,
Yeah.
3 musical numbers. The budget for Werewolf by Night was around $27 million.
Yeah.
And the same shooting schedule, except they had 3 actual sets. We had to do the entire Haunted Mansion on the computer and just do a virtual background.
No. Now you get used to the Marvel low budget, which is slightly a different scale.
Exactly. It's just so funny. And casting, we weren't cast until the 3rd week. Like, it was a 3-week shoot. We didn't have our main cast until week 3. Well, that's not true. We had Will Arnett. And I learned after shooting all day, when my voice is tired, I talk exactly like Will Arnett. It's a little less dry. But anyway, so that was great. I'm really proud. That's probably my favorite I mean, that and Treasure Island, because I got to co-write Treasure Island. This I got to co-write and direct.
Yeah.
Um, and that, minus a few weird details I've probably forgotten, is between these two episodes.
And
Most of
it brings us to the pinnacle of your career.
this show, two bearded Beardos. I'm always want to say, I want to say it the right way. It's weird talking about yourself because it's boring to me, but I know people ask. So
Yeah.
at least this was more weird stuff that you don't know about. Hopefully,
I just enjoy winding you up and watching you go, because that is
espresso
entertaining to
helps.
me. Yes.
This is actually espresso, Coke Zero, and milk.
Wow.
I learned that from a Spanish friend. They would put espresso in their Cokes.
Wow.
Yeah, just instead of adding sugar in anything, you just put it in your Coke, your Diet Coke, and you get this caffeine.
Wow, that's crazy. I'm gonna have to try
good
that
for directing
someday when I feel like killing myself.
One thing I would say, I don't know if everybody who's listening to this has been noticing, maybe it's just because it's marketing to me, but there's a lot of ADHD information there, especially on Instagram, and people are talking about it and diagnosing it and all that.
Yeah.
And I've always, ever since I was born, my parents were like, you're different. And people are like, you're funny, but you're different. And I realized in the last year, particularly, that it seems to be predominantly, what I thought was my personality was ADHD. But in our business, at least for me, it's been much more of a help than a hindrance. It's
That's
really
interesting.
bad for keeping your house clean,
Yeah.
but you learn to make to-do lists and just sort of, the discipline part was the hardest part. Just kind of buckle down and focus, because that is not your MO. But that's why directing
ADHD is fuel for creativity.
It
Because
literally
you're
is.
constantly looking at things differently, constantly putting things together that may not necessarily need to be. And
Absolutely. You think out. You can't not think outside the box. It's hard to think
because
in the
there's no
box.
box. There's
Exactly.
no box for you.
And that kind of hyperactivity of it was like this is great for directing, because there's 12 things you need to focus on: the camera, the lens, the actors, the scene, the overall thing, the music you're going to have, the sound effects you could add. So I found that it's just, as some people have said on these, again, Instagram things talking about it, it's a superpower, and it's also a hindrance to, again,
in real life. Yes.
Yes, to having a clean house is really where I find it, because I can make lists. I have my phone is just constantly reminding me of stuff. So I've figured the workarounds to get stuff done. But one of the earmarks of it is you only do a thing when it's an emergency, when it has to be done.
Yep.
Because if you don't, why wouldn't you just lay in bed and watch TV or relax? And so that's, I think, when I read that, I'm like, okay, that's very me. Like, do your project the night before it's due.
Yeah.
And I've learned to not do that, particularly with work. But I for anyone there who has ADHD, it's definitely, it's not like dyslexia. And I know dyslexia is a big thing with creative people too. But I haven't heard of the benefits of dyslexia. But my question was ultimately, so have you found that you check some of those boxes, or
I check some of those boxes. I'm not really ADHD. I'm much more sliding in a straight line.
You seem more linear, yeah.
I do have dyslexic tendencies.
Oh, okay. So there you go.
Because I've never been good at differentiating right from left very well. I always have to have a mechanism in my brain to tell me which direction is which.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I have a problem reading, just reading,
really?
because I have to go over it several times.
Oh, for comprehension or just tracking it?
Just, well, kind of both.
Yeah.
Because I get lost in the thoughts of the what's written, and then just lose my place. It's very odd.
Do you think that made your visual acuity stronger because you're verbal in terms of reading? Not you, obviously very well spoken, but do you think it enhanced? In other words, whatever you're missing, your other skills get stronger.
Perhaps, but the funny thing is, I'm also really good at cold reading. I can be given a script and I can read with feeling.
I've seen you do
from the first read, and it's that's one of my superpowers, but I never get to use it. But
Well, no, we've got to do it when we've done Scripts Gone Wild and our live
oh yeah,
performance.
yeah.
Darren and I have been involved with the group, the Frank Dietz and the guy who set it up, who's I don't know as well as Frank.
Right.
I want to say Joe Bob, but it's not Joe Bob.
No.
Anyway, Scripts Gone Wild. You can Google it. There's a bunch of them on YouTube. Um, but yeah, your cold reads and your impressions are great. I mean, uh, but I was curious because again, a lot of creative people have these kind of undercuts from neurotypical people.
Yeah.
But and again, I think for me, the ADHD really is just sucks for my house being organized. I
Well,
live.
yeah, but that's not only ADHD, because my house is the same way. And
Oh, really? Okay.
it's just that there's plenty of time to do that. I
Well,
have
and
things
that's
that I need to do now
exactly. It is.
that have my attention.
It's management. It's time management,
Yeah.
which is why I'm really good. Again, well, I'm really good. I'm very successful as a director. I'm not saying the work is good. I wouldn't go
Yeah.
that far, but I'm saying I can manage my time going, okay, we're doing this now, but we need to set that. So make sure you
Right.
start setting that up because that's where we're going to next. Like
You're
that's
good
what,
at seeing paths in front of you and
yes, and
seeing where they go.
pattern recognition,
Yep.
pattern creation.
Yep.
But you're right. Throwing my clothes on the floor when I'm done with them, it can be there for a week because I don't care.
Yeah,
I
because
mean,
it
again, I
doesn't
live alone.
matter.
We
In
live
the grand
alone.
scheme of things, it doesn't matter.
It's true, but that's that ADHD thing where it's like, if it's an emergency or if it's a priority due to whatever, then it gets the attention.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't have unwashed dishes with food on them. I always rinse them.
Yeah.
I've got workarounds so my house isn't infested with rats or anything.
Exactly.
But it is hard when you're dating. And
Well-
again, as I've mentioned earlier in the broadcast, we are single. So ladies, I said ladies this time. I didn't say
that's-
girls or gals or
That's
skirts
good.
or broads.
Well, you did.
Oh, I want credit for that. I want credit for all the women I haven't beaten in my life. I've never laid my hand on one. Well, I've laid my hand. Never
That's
mind.
that's a whole
Don't stop on hold or it gets really
episode easy. That's a whole episode in itself. Because I spent 10 years in a long-term relationship, and it's a different situation, and it's
Well, actually, then I did clean the house because I knew my girlfriend was coming over, and
yeah.
I wouldn't force her to endure, dirty clothes on the floor and cat
Right.
litter scattered out because whatever, the cat don't care. I don't care. I mean,
Cats
it's not
don't
like
clean
dirty.
after themselves,
Oh, God, they do
unfortunately.
not. Darren and I are both cat dads, and at this point I have 4,
That's
Um,
insane.
and it's going to be a challenge. The 3 little ones are now 3 months old. Probably about another 3 months, I'll introduce them to. Well, I've introduced them, but I let them live with the.
No one wants to hear you talking about your cats as babies.
Yes, they do.
No, they don't.
I have pictures. Hold on, Manuel.
Oh, see, here we go. On that note,
All right. Well, thank you all for tolerating if you haven't turned out. I mean, I totally understand if you did. But if you did, tell your single, successful, rich girlfriends, I mean, friends who are female, who are single, tell them to listen in.
yeah, that'll work.
I mean, if you don't like Santa Claus looking guys, or people who could have also played dwarves in Lord of the Rings.
Do you have daddy issues or a Santa fetish?
Oh my God, daddy issues.
This is for you.
I can't tell you how many women have had.
I subscribed to daddy issues for a long time.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. You take care of them. You provide. Usually, you're buying dinner.
Yeah.
Which is fine. That's also being a gentleman when I
have
was
no
raised.
problem
So,
with that.
yeah. Well, and they don't either.
Well, what I have problem with is if it's not reciprocated.
That is funny you say that because I was just talking to a friend. I said, you know what? Almost all the women I've ever dated, I was the giver.
Yep.
The provider. And again, I was working. I had a lot of it was just financial. I'll pay for the trip, and I'll, if you buy your meal once in a while, I'm happy. And I never did it with expecting fiscal reciprocity.
Yeah.
But I always thought, well, and then it comes down to are all relationships. This is a good one for next time. Transactional. Are all relationships, except for family or something where, there's a genetic component, are they transactional in the world today?
Well,
Because I think that my theory is yes.
of course they are. At,
Yeah.
at the very base meaning of it, it is. We've couched it in ritual and in
Romance. Yeah.
procedures and romance, but the base of it is it's supposed to create something else, and that is an
All right.
exchange.
Well, that is our topic for
that
our
is that is the teaser for next time.
Yeah, transactional relationships, dating in the film industry, dating
Oh my
when
God!
you have a
Yeah.
career, and the best sex we've ever. No, we can't do that one.
No.
The weirdest sex we know. The
No.
strangest. No.
No.
We could do newlywed questions. Where's the most unusual place you made whoopee?
That'd
All right,
have to be
that'll be the
boob
top for next. Okay. I'm gonna tease it. Leonard Nimoy's desk. And good night.
Oh my goodness. We'll see you next time.